I never imagined that the happiest day of my life could collapse in a matter of seconds. I stood at the altar, my hands trembling, though not from fear, but from overwhelming joy. The soft glow of the stained glass windows painted my dress in hues of gold and rose, and I could feel Michael's steady gaze anchoring me. My heart was racing, pounding with the rhythm of hope, of promises about to be spoken. The organ music softened, the murmurs of the guests faded, and I was ready to say the words that would bind us forever. But before my lips could part, a voice, sharp and venomous, sliced through the silence like a blade. It was my sister, Sophia, standing in her pew, her face pale, yet her eyes burning with cruel fire. And then she shouted the words that would stain my soul. "Allison is pregnant with another man's child." The gasp that followed was deafening. It seemed as if the entire congregation inhaled at once, drawing all the air out of the church, leaving me suffocated and trembling. My knees buckled, and I felt my bouquet nearly slip from my fingers as a wave of heat rushed to my face. Around me, whispers ignited like flames, words I couldn't fully catch but could feel piercing me nonetheless. I saw Margaret, my mother, clutch her chest in disbelief, and Jonathan, my father, lower his head in shame. And Michael, dear Michael, his eyes darkened, not with anger, not yet, but with confusion so profound that it cut me deeper than any blade could. The silence that followed Sophia's accusation was unbearable, a silence filled with judgment, suspicion, and humiliation. Sophia's voice didn't quiver. She stood tall, arms crossed, relishing the power she held in that moment. I knew that stance, that bitter smile curling at the corner of her lips. She had waited for this, planned it, fed on the anticipation of seeing me fall. My sister, my own flesh and blood, had chosen this sacred moment to shatter me. I wanted to scream, to deny it instantly, but my voice caught in my throat. My entire body was paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her cruelty. I could hear the rustling of dresses, the creaking of wooden pews as guests turned their heads toward me, as if I were a criminal suddenly unmasked. I swallowed hard, but no sound came. I stood there, exposed, my soul stripped bare before them all. Memories of our childhood surged into me like cruel reminders. The nights we shared the same room, whispered secrets under the blanket, promises of sisterhood. I remembered the times I covered for her when she lied, when I defended her against our parents, when I believed we were allies. But standing in that church, I realized those memories meant nothing to her. Sophia had always carried jealousy in her veins like poison, but I never believed she would strike this low at this precise moment. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not now, not with all these eyes dissecting me. Michael hadn't moved yet, and his stillness was terrifying. His gaze locked on me, searching, questioning, perhaps doubting. My chest tightened, and I feared that if he looked away, even for a second, I would collapse entirely. Around us, I felt the divide forming, some guests leaning closer to each other to whisper, others glaring at me with disdain. I could almost hear the stories taking shape. She betrayed him. She trapped him. She fooled us all. The cruelty of gossip is that it spreads faster than truth, and in that instant, Sophia's lie was already more powerful than my silence. My mother's voice rose faintly, a tremor of disbelief. "Sophia, what are you saying?" But even she sounded uncertain, as though part of her wondered if it might be true. That hesitation stabbed me more deeply than the accusation itself. My father remained silent, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the floor as if distance could shield him from the shame. I wanted to run to Michael, to grab his hands and force him to hear my truth, but my body betrayed me. I felt rooted, trapped, imprisoned in a nightmare I hadn't chosen. Sophia's laughter, soft and triumphant, echoed inside me like a death knell. Then came the murmurs that felt like daggers. She hid it so well. I knew something was off. The poor groom. Each phrase cut into me, slicing at the love I had carefully built, at the trust I had nurtured. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the dizziness of humiliation. I could feel sweat gathering at my temples, my chest heaving with shallow breaths, as if I were drowning in front of them all. Sophia remained composed, her performance flawless, her cruelty masterful, and I hated myself for being unprepared, for never imagining she would go this far. The priest, Father Gregory, stood frozen at first, his hand still raised from the blessing he had been about to give. His eyes darted between Sophia and me, his brow furrowing in deep thought. He knew something. His silence wasn't ignorance. It was calculation. I sensed it in the way his lips pressed together, in the way he watched Sophia not as a believer, but as a wolf waiting to reveal its prey. But he said nothing yet. His restraint was maddening, though perhaps he was measuring the weight of what he knew. I felt my voice returning, trembling, fragile but desperate. "That's not true," I finally whispered, but the words were too soft, swallowed by the weight of judgment that filled the room. Sophia smirked, tilting her head as if mocking my feeble attempt at defense. Michael's eyes narrowed, and I saw his lips part, but before he could speak, a child cried in the back pew, breaking the tension for a mere second before it grew twice as heavy. I looked up at the cross above the altar, as if seeking divine rescue, and prayed silently for strength. My world was crumbling in front of everyone I loved, and I had no idea how I could survive the minutes that followed. Sophia was 3 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she wore that difference like a crown. To her, being older meant being better, stronger, entitled to everything before I could even dream of touching it. When we were little girls, she would push me aside to grab the bigger toy, the brighter dress, the seat next to our mother at the dinner table. I would cry, not because I lost a toy, but because I longed for a piece of the affection she seemed to guard so jealously. Our mother often scolded me for being too sensitive, but never truly confronted Sophia's possessiveness. From those early years, I understood that Sophia and I were not equals in her eyes. We were rivals in a war I hadn't chosen. Our home wasn't broken, but it was far from perfect. My father, Jonathan, worked long hours and carried himself with a sternness that made him emotionally distant. He offered us stability, but not warmth. My mother, Margaret, leaned heavily on Sophia, perhaps because she was the firstborn, the child who had taught her how to be a mother. Sophia basked in that role, proud to be Mom's favorite helper, while I was the afterthought, the second chance. I grew up watching Sophia soak in admiration for things I could never quite match: her sharp wit, her striking eyes, her ability to command attention. It wasn't that I lacked qualities of my own, but mine always seemed muted in comparison to her brilliance. School was another battlefield. Sophia was popular without trying. She had a charisma that made other children gravitate toward her. I, on the other hand, was quieter, the listener, the one who people came to when they needed comfort but rarely celebrated. Teachers praised Sophia's confidence while calling me sweet but timid. That phrase became my curse: sweet but timid, never enough to shine. Sophia flaunted her popularity like armor, always reminding me that I was walking in her shadow. I sometimes wondered if my very existence was her burden, as though she resented me for being born at all. Still, there were moments, rare and fleeting, when she allowed me into her world. We whispered secrets under blankets, giggled about crushes, even dreamed about the weddings we would one day have. In those nights, I saw glimpses of the sister I wished I had permanently: warm, protective, kind. But those moments never lasted. By the next morning, her walls were back up, and I was once again the competitor she needed to outshine. I clung to those rare nights of closeness, convincing myself they meant something real, even when deep down I knew she would betray me the moment jealousy stirred. As teenagers, the cracks in our relationship widened into chasms. Sophia discovered beauty and power, using them like weapons. Boys lined up for her attention, and she basked in the glow of their admiration. I was the friend, the shoulder to cry on when they broke her heart, the invisible girl standing behind the shining star. It hurt, but I didn't envy her exactly. I envied the love she received so effortlessly, while I had to beg for scraps of acknowledgement. Sophia, however, seemed to sense that envy and twisted it against me, mocking me with words like, "Don't worry, maybe someone will like you one day." Each insult was disguised as a joke, but each left scars that shaped my insecurities. Our mother, without realizing it, deepened the divide. She often compared us aloud. "Sophia has such natural leadership. Allison has such a kind heart," as if assigning us roles in a play where Sophia was always the lead, and I the supporting character. My father, more withdrawn than ever, seldom intervened, though I sometimes caught him smiling at me in ways he never did at Sophia. Perhaps he saw something in me that my mother overlooked, but his silence was not protection. It was absence, and in that absence, Sophia thrived unchecked, allowed to grow into a force that believed she could dominate me forever. Yet despite everything, I still admired her. That's the cruelest part. I looked at her confidence, her fire, and I wished I could borrow it just once. I followed her around like a shadow, hoping some of her strength would rub off on me. She knew it, and she used it. She dangled affection like a prize, giving me crumbs of kindness when it suited her, only to snatch them away when she felt threatened. Love from Sophia was always conditional, and I accepted it, because a conditional love still felt better than none at all. The worst wound came when I was 16. There was a boy, Daniel, gentle, funny, the first to truly see me. We spent weeks walking home together, laughing under autumn skies. I was naive enough to believe I had something special, something entirely mine, until one day, I saw Sophia's hand in his, her lips pressed against his, her eyes flashing victory at me from across the street. She didn't want him. I knew that. She only wanted to prove that whatever I cherished, she could take. Daniel apologized weeks later, but the damage was done. Sophia had not just stolen a boy, she had stolen my hope. That day, something inside me hardened. I still loved my sister, but I began to guard myself. I realized she wasn't my protector but my saboteur, and that her envy would only grow sharper with time. I promised myself that one day I would have something she couldn't touch, something she couldn't destroy. I didn't know then that something would be Michael. I didn't know that he would become the center of her bitterness, the proof that I had stepped out of her shadow. And I didn't know that the wedding I dreamed of since those nights under the blankets would become the battlefield where Sophia would deliver her cruelest attack. I met Michael on a rainy afternoon that should have been ordinary, but changed everything. I had ducked into a small bookstore to escape the storm, clutching my coat around me as water dripped from my hair. The shop smelled of old paper and coffee, a scent that instantly calmed me. While browsing the shelves, I bumped into him. Literally. He steadied me with a hand on my arm, his smile disarming and warm. His eyes, a steady shade of hazel, seemed to look right through me, not in a way that exposed my flaws, but as if he was searching for the pieces of me I had kept hidden. That moment lingered, suspended between awkwardness and possibility, and before I knew it, we were talking like old friends. Michael wasn't like the boys I had known before. He wasn't interested in impressing or conquering. He was genuinely curious about who I was. He asked me about my favorite books, and when I mentioned a title few people knew, his face lit up. He had read it too. Our connection felt instantaneous, like threads pulling us closer without resistance. I left the bookstore with his number scribbled on a receipt, and a heart pounding faster than it had in years. That night, I lay awake, replaying every word, every glance, every laugh. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt chosen. Our relationship blossomed quickly, not out of desperation, but out of a natural rhythm that seemed destined. Michael had a way of making me feel like the most important person in any room. He noticed details others overlooked, how I twirled my hair when I was nervous, how I bit my lip when I was trying not to laugh, how my voice softened when I spoke about my dreams. He cherished those details instead of mocking them. With him, I didn't feel overshadowed or small. I felt seen, cherished, and loved for who I truly was. It was intoxicating, but also terrifying, because I knew Sophia would notice. When I first introduced Michael to my family, Sophia's smile was too perfect, her embrace too tight. She praised his manners, complimented his career ambitions, and even joked about how lucky I was. But beneath her honeyed words, I recognized the glint in her eyes. It was the same look she had given me when she stole Daniel years before. An unspoken challenge, a silent vow that she would not allow me to have something she couldn't take. My stomach twisted with unease, but I pushed it aside, desperate to believe that maybe, just maybe, she would respect this part of my life. Deep down, though, I knew better. Michael, of course, didn't see it at first. He treated Sophia with kindness, unaware of the venom that brewed beneath her charm. She laughed at his jokes too loudly, touched his arm unnecessarily, and asked him questions about his life as though she wanted to memorize him. Michael responded politely, but never crossed a line. If anything, he seemed oblivious to her intentions, focused only on me. That devotion should have reassured me, but instead, it heightened my fear. Because if Sophia couldn't win him, she would find another way to ruin what we had. I knew her too well to believe otherwise. The first signs of her interference came subtly. She would whisper little comments when Michael wasn't around, planting seeds of doubt. "Are you sure he's serious about you, Allison?" she asked once, tilting her head with feigned concern. Another time, she suggested he seemed too good to be true. her tone dripping with suggestion. I tried to ignore her, but the words burrowed into my heart, creating cracks in my confidence. Michael noticed my unease and held me tighter, telling me he loved me, that I was all he wanted. But the shadow of Sophia's envy loomed larger with every passing day. Despite her attempts, our love grew stronger. Michael proposed to me under a canopy of stars, his voice trembling with emotion as he promised me forever. I remember the way his hands shook, the way my heart nearly burst with joy as I said yes. It was the moment I had longed for, proof that I had something no one, not even Sophia, could take away. But even as I slipped the ring onto my finger, a part of me shivered with the certainty that my sister would not accept this outcome quietly. Her silence in the days that followed was too sharp, too deliberate, like the calm before a storm. Our engagement period should have been blissful, but Sophia hovered like a shadow. She volunteered to help with the wedding planning, inserting herself into decisions that weren't hers to make. She criticized my dress, questioned my choices for flowers, and laughed at my ideas for music. To outsiders, it might have looked like sisterly banter, but I knew her true aim: to remind me that she was still in control, that nothing I built could exist without her interference. Michael urged me to set boundaries, but I hesitated, afraid of igniting her wrath too soon. Still, there were moments of light. Late at night, Michael and I would sit on the porch, planning our future together. We talked about the house we would buy, the children we might have, the adventures we would take. In those moments, I felt invincible, wrapped in his love, believing that together, we could weather anything. But Sophia's shadow always crept back in, whispering doubts, sowing fears, and waiting for the moment to strike. I didn't know when or how, but I knew she wouldn't let my happiness stand unchallenged. And as the wedding day drew closer, that dread grew heavier, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The months leading up to the wedding should have been a time of joy, but instead, they were riddled with unease. At first, it was subtle, small cracks I tried to ignore, convincing myself I was being paranoid. Sophia would smile while helping me fold invitations, but her comments always carried a sting. "Are you sure you want this venue?" she would ask, her tone dripping with condescension. "It feels modest, don't you think?" When I didn't bite, she would shrug and mutter, "Well, it's your choice." The words lingered, haunting me, as if everything I planned was beneath her standard. The dress fitting became another battlefield. I had fallen in love with a simple, elegant gown that made me feel beautiful without drowning me in extravagance. When I stepped out of the dressing room, radiant with anticipation, Sophia smirked. "It's nice, Allison. Very safe. But don't you think Michael deserves something more memorable?" The seamstress glanced awkwardly between us as my cheeks burned with shame. I wanted to scream at her, to defend my choice, but instead, I smiled weakly and turned back to the mirror. My reflection blurred, not from tears, but from the growing weight of doubt. Sophia also began spreading whispers among relatives. At dinners, she would lean close to our aunts and cousins, lowering her voice just enough that I couldn't catch the words, but loud enough that I could feel the sting of their glances. Once, I overheard her say, "Michael is wonderful, but Allison has always been fragile. I just hope she can handle marriage." The implication hung heavy in the air, eroding the image I had worked so hard to build. I felt cornered, silenced, unable to confront her without seeming insecure or paranoid. She was clever, strategic, always choosing words that wounded without leaving visible scars. Michael noticed my unease, though he never pressed too hard. He would wrap his arms around me at night and whisper, "Don't let her get to you. I love you, and that's all that matters." His words soothed me, but I couldn't shake the fear that Sophia was weaving a web too strong for me to escape. She wasn't just attacking me, she was planting seeds in others, building a narrative where I was unworthy of him, where my fragility would one day break us apart. And though Michael's love felt unshakable, I worried about the cracks she was carving into everyone else's faith in me. The rehearsal dinner was the clearest warning. Surrounded by friends, laughter, and clinking glasses, Sophia stood to make a toast. Her smile gleamed under the warm light, but her words cut with precision. "To my baby sister, Allison, you've always surprised me. I never thought you'd find someone like Michael, someone patient enough, kind enough, strong enough to take care of you." The room chuckled politely, but I heard the undertone. "Allison is weak. Allison needs saving." My hands trembled under the table as Michael squeezed them, but even his warmth couldn't erase the humiliation. My parents, too, reacted differently to Sophia's behavior. My mother seemed torn, laughing nervously at Sophia's remarks, but later defending her. "You know your sister, she doesn't mean harm." My father, however, grew distant, his silence heavy. Once, as we cleared the table, he muttered to me, "Don't let her poison your happiness." It was the only acknowledgement he ever gave of Sophia's malice, and though it comforted me, it also confirmed my deepest fear, that this wasn't my imagination. The cracks weren't in my head. They were real, widening with every passing day. I tried to confront Sophia once, just days before the wedding. I found her in her room, humming as she scrolled through her phone, and asked directly, "Why are you doing this?" She looked up, feigning innocence, her eyes wide. "Doing what, Allie? I'm helping you. Don't be so dramatic." Her tone was so casual, so dismissive, that I felt foolish even standing there. But as I turned to leave, she added almost in a whisper, "You should thank me. I'm the only one brave enough to say what others think." My stomach twisted, a storm brewing inside me, but I walked away, too drained to fight. The night before the wedding, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent except for the creak of the old pipes, but my mind was deafening. I replayed every insult, every whisper, every smirk. I wondered if Sophia would ever stop, if marriage would free me from her shadow, or if she would follow me forever, ruining every joy I dared to grasp. A part of me considered calling it off, not because I doubted Michael, but because I feared Sophia would never allow me peace. Sleep eventually claimed me, but even in my dreams, her laughter echoed. By the morning of the ceremony, I tried to bury my dread under layers of makeup and determination. My bridesmaids fussed around me, adjusting my veil, smoothing the fabric of my gown, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Sophia's smile at breakfast had been too wide, her voice too sweet. It was the look of a predator moments before striking. I told myself she wouldn't dare ruin my wedding, not in front of everyone, not in such a sacred place. But as I walked toward the church, bouquet in hand and heart racing with anticipation, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't behind me. It was waiting at the altar. The music swelled as I stepped into the church, the scent of lilies thick in the air, sunlight spilling through the stained glass like blessings poured from heaven itself. Every step felt like a heartbeat, every gaze fixed on me as if I were glowing with the joy of the moment. I locked eyes with Michael at the altar, and his smile steadied me, washing away the unease that had haunted me for weeks. My dress trailed behind me like a whisper of dreams, my hands trembling slightly around the bouquet. It was everything I had envisioned since I was a child, every detail perfect, every promise just within reach. I breathed deeply, ready to speak vows carved into my soul. The ceremony unfolded with grace. The priest's voice was calm, solemn, resonating through the vaulted ceilings, wrapping us in reverence. I felt tears prick at my eyes, not from fear but from gratitude. For once, I believed nothing could ruin this. I looked at the faces of my family, my mother dabbing at her eyes, my father stoic but softened, friends smiling tenderly. This was my moment, mine and Michael's, untouched by shadows. My heart beat faster as Father Gregory turned toward me, ready to lead us into the vows. My lips parted, the first words trembling on the edge of freedom, until Sophia's voice cut through the air like thunder. "Allison is pregnant with another man's child." The words rang sharp, slicing the sacred silence into pieces. Gasps erupted like a storm of knives, echoing against the high stone walls. My bouquet nearly slipped from my hands as blood rushed to my face, heat and shame consuming me in waves. The organist faltered, notes crashing awkwardly, then silence swallowed everything. I turned toward Sophia, my body rigid, my heart thundering so violently I thought it might burst. She stood tall, her dress immaculate, her smile cruelly satisfied as if she had been waiting for this precise moment. All eyes shifted from her to me, and in that collective gaze, I felt stripped bare. The room erupted into murmurs. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest as if the weight of shame had landed on her heart. My father's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing, though he said nothing. Aunts and cousins leaned toward one another, whispering, their faces shifting between pity and disgust. I heard fragments. I knew it. Poor Michael. How could she? The air grew heavy, suffocating, filled with suspicion and betrayal. My legs trembled, my vision blurred, and yet I stood frozen, unable to scream, unable to deny, unable to breathe. Sophia had stolen not only my voice, but my dignity, in a single, merciless strike. Michael's face was what broke me most. His eyes widened at first in shock, then hardened into something I couldn't read. Confusion, doubt, pain. He didn't look away, and that steady gaze burned into me more than any accusation ever could. I wanted to run to him, to grab his hands and beg him to believe me, but I couldn't move. My body felt chained to the floor, bound by the weight of everyone's judgment. The silence between us was louder than Sophia's shout, more terrifying than the gasps. In that silence, I felt our love teetering on the edge of ruin. Sophia's tone was venom wrapped in silk as she continued. She deceived you all. This wedding is a lie. She isn't the woman you think she is. Her words dripped with triumph, her eyes glittering with malice, as though she had finally won a war she'd been waging for years. She raised her chin, daring anyone to contradict her, feeding off the chaos she had unleashed. I wanted to scream the truth, to rip apart her lies, but my throat was dry. My voice lodged somewhere deep in my chest. I felt like a child again, small and defenseless before her relentless cruelty. My mother stammered, "Sophia, stop this madness," but even her voice trembled with doubt. My father lowered his gaze to the floor, silent, offering no shield against the storm. Guests shifted in their seats, their eyes sharp, dissecting me, already rewriting my story into scandal. My cheeks burned with humiliation. My heart screamed with betrayal. I could barely breathe, but I forced the words out, a fragile whisper. That's not true. The denial felt weightless, powerless against Sophia's booming lies. My voice, so small, vanished into the murmurs. Swallowed by disbelief, I turned toward Michael, desperation clawing at me. "You know me," I whispered, though my lips barely moved. He blinked, his jaw tightening, torn between love and the poison Sophia had spilled. The distance between us felt insurmountable, though only a few feet separated our bodies. I saw the flicker of doubt, and it crushed me. Sophia had not just humiliated me, she had infected the man I loved, tainting the bond we had built with her venom. My chest ached, my eyes burned, but still no tears fell. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me collapse. And then, just when the silence became unbearable, Father Gregory raised his hand. His face was grave, his eyes steady, his voice calm but carrying authority. "Enough," he said, and the word rippled through the room like a command from heaven itself. The murmurs ceased, the shifting stilled, and all eyes turned to him. For the first time since Sophia's outburst, I felt the slightest thread of hope. He looked at Sophia, not me, not Michael, but her, and in his gaze, I saw something extraordinary. Knowledge. He knew, and in that knowledge, I sensed the beginning of a revelation that could change everything. The church seemed to hold its breath after Father Gregory's command, as though even the walls waited for his judgment. My pulse throbbed in my ears, drowning out the faint rustle of dresses and the nervous cough of someone in the back pew. Sophia stood with a smirk plastered on her face, arms folded, as if she had secured her victory and no one could undo it. I wanted to shout at her, to demand why she was doing this, but my body was rigid, locked in place by shame and terror. Guests leaned forward, expectant, their faces mirrors of both curiosity and doubt. Michael's grip on the rail tightened, his knuckles pale, his eyes darting between me and the priest. My entire future felt like it balanced on the edge of Father Gregory's next breath. Sophia tilted her head defiantly, like a queen before her subjects. "Why are we prolonging this charade?" she asked, her voice dripping with false righteousness. "You all deserve the truth before this farce goes any further." She scanned the room, capturing her audience, feeding on their murmurs. "My sister pretends to be virtuous, but she carries another man's child. Would you really allow Michael to marry such a liar?" Her words dripped like acid, corroding my reputation, scorching every bond of trust I had built. My heart shriveled under her cruelty, and yet, a small fire of anger stirred in me. She was painting me as a villain, and everyone was letting her. My mother rose to her feet, her trembling hands clutching the pew. "Sophia, enough," she cried, her voice breaking. But Sophia only laughed, a brittle, sharp sound that filled the church with venom. My father shifted uncomfortably, his lips pressed into a thin line, as though weighing which daughter he should protect or betray by silence. I wanted him to defend me, to declare loudly that he knew who I was, but he remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor. I realized then that the people who should have been my shield, were just as paralyzed as I was. Sophia had chained them all with her poison. Michael's silence was worse than anything. He stared at me with a searching expression, his brows knit tightly together. I saw love flicker in his eyes, but doubt gnawed at the edges, eating away at the certainty we had always shared. I wanted to scream that he was my anchor, my truth, but what if he didn't believe me? What if his hesitation grew into conviction against me? My chest tightened with panic, imagining his back turning, his hands pulling away, his vows silenced before they ever left his lips. Fear clawed at me like a wild animal, tearing at the very foundation of my dreams. Father Gregory finally stepped forward, his robes brushing softly against the marble floor. His calm presence commanded attention, quieting the murmurs with nothing more than his steady gaze. He looked directly at Sophia, his expression unreadable, though his eyes seemed to cut through her smug exterior. "What you say is grave," he said, his voice deep, resonant. "Accusations such as these weigh heavily on the soul of the accused and the accuser." His words hung heavy in the air, pressing on us all. I felt my breath catch, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. For the first time, Sophia shifted uneasily, but she recovered quickly, tossing her hair back with theatrical arrogance. "I only speak because I care for Michael," she declared. "He deserves to know the truth before binding himself to deceit. I will not let my silence condemn him to a marriage built on lies." She looked at Michael then, her eyes softening with feigned pity, her voice tinged with sisterly concern. The performance was sickeningly perfect. If I hadn't lived a lifetime of her schemes, I might have believed her. Watching her twist her poison into a cloak of righteousness made my stomach turn, yet the congregation seemed enthralled, unable to look away from her wicked show. Tears finally pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Sophia," I whispered, though my voice quivered, "why are you doing this to me? To us?" My words trembled into the stillness, almost swallowed by the vastness of the church. She glanced at me briefly, her smirk faltering for only a second before it returned sharper than ever. "Because truth has a way of surfacing, Allison," she replied coldly. I felt a chill run down my spine at the hatred buried in her tone. This wasn't about truth. It was about destruction, her need to shatter me before the people I loved most. Guests shifted uncomfortably, and whispers rose again, hushed but relentless, circling like vultures. I heard fragments. "Is it true? What about Michael? She looks guilty." Their words sliced into me like invisible blades. My knees wavered beneath the weight of judgment, and I clutched the bouquet tighter, the stems digging into my skin. My dress, once a symbol of purity and hope, now felt like a prison, suffocating me with its heavy fabric and stifling promise. I longed to tear it off, to flee from the walls that trapped me, but my body refused to move. I was held captive not by stone or steel, but by shame and betrayal. And then Father Gregory's voice rose again, steady and deliberate, cutting through the whispers like light through fog. "Sophia," he said, his eyes locking onto her with undeniable authority, "there is something you have forgotten to mention, something you confessed to me only days ago, in the sanctity of this church." The air stilled instantly. Gasps rippled through the pews, and Sophia's confident smile faltered. My heart leapt into my throat. Could it be? Was this the moment? The priest's calm gaze never wavered, and for the first time since her cruel outburst, I saw Sophia's mask crack. The silence that followed was unbearable, suffused with anticipation and dread. Every guest leaned forward, every breath suspended in the heavy air. I clung to that fragile thread of hope, praying that whatever Father Gregory held in his hands, or in his memory, would pierce through Sophia's lies and expose her venom for what it truly was. And yet, a sliver of fear remained lodged in my chest. What if even the truth wasn't enough to undo the damage she had already done? Father Gregory's words struck Sophia like a sudden chill. Her smirk faltered, her lips parting slightly as if to object, but no sound came out. The congregation leaned forward, hungry for revelation, their murmurs silenced by the authority in his tone. I clutched the bouquet to my chest, my knuckles white, praying that the truth he carried would set me free. Michael's eyes darted from Sophia to the priest, his jaw tight with restrained tension. The church, so vast and echoing, seemed to shrink into a suffocating box, trapping us all in this unbearable anticipation. The priest's voice resonated deeply, steady as a bell tolling for judgment. "Sophia," he said, "you stood before me in confession, weeping, consumed by guilt. and spoke words no one here has heard, until now. His gaze was unwavering, almost merciless. You admitted that the child you now accuse your sister of carrying does not belong to Allison at all, but to you. A collective gasp rippled through the pews, sharp as the snap of a whip. My breath caught in my throat, my heart pounding with disbelief. Could this truly be real? Had she trapped herself with her own poison? Sophia's face drained of color. "No!" she cried suddenly, her voice shrill, desperate. "He twists my words. That's not what I meant." But the more she protested, the more transparent her mask became. Whispers erupted through the crowd like wildfire, speculation spiraling uncontrollably. Her child? She lied? Why would she? The venom she had spat at me moments ago now rebounded against her, and I stood frozen, struggling to process the tidal wave crashing through the church. My tormentor, my sister, was exposed in the most devastating way. Michael's face was a storm of confusion and fury. He stepped forward, his voice low but shaking with restrained rage. "Sophia, is this true?" His eyes bore into her, demanding the truth she could no longer twist into half-lies. She stammered, tears welling, but the silence that followed betrayed her more than any words could. The audience, once enraptured by her performance, now recoiled from her like a snake revealed in their midst. I felt a strange mix of pity and satisfaction, a vindication that didn't heal the wound she had inflicted, but stitched it enough to keep me standing. Father Gregory raised a hand to still the storm of whispers. "What was spoken in confession is sacred," he said, his tone heavy. "Yet, when one uses deceit to destroy another's life in the house of God, silence becomes complicity. Sophia, you begged for forgiveness, for your secret sin, and now you twist your sister's name to carry your shame. The truth must be known. The life growing within you was conceived in betrayal." His words reverberated through the church like thunder. I could barely breathe. Betrayal. The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke, suffocating us all. Sophia collapsed into the nearest pew, her hands clutching her head. I didn't mean for it to," she whispered, but no one comforted her. Even our parents looked away, unable to meet her eyes. My mother's lips trembled as though prayers were dying unsaid on her tongue, and my father's shoulders sagged with defeat. The proud image Sophia had crafted all her life crumbled before us, revealing only desperation and lies. For once, she was stripped bare, her cruelty glaring for everyone to see. And yet, the damage she caused lingered, a shadow still pressing down on me. Guests exchanged looks of shock and dismay. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered with vindicated tones, their judgments swift and merciless. The spectacle that had once painted me as a villain now painted her as the betrayer. I stood trembling, half relieved, half devastated, wondering whether my name had truly been cleared, or if suspicion still clung to me like ash after a fire. My heart longed for Michael's voice, for his certainty, for him to take my hand and end this nightmare. But he stood still, silent, his eyes burning with conflict. Sophia finally raised her head, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. "You don't understand," she spat, her voice cracking. "I only wanted to protect you, Michael. You deserve better than her. I was desperate." Her words spilled out, twisted and raw, but the more she spoke, the deeper she buried herself. Michael recoiled as if her confession were a physical blow. My stomach churned as I realized the full scope of her cruelty. She hadn't just tried to destroy me, she had tried to steal him, my life, my future, my love. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on us, demanding resolution. My bouquet trembled in my hands, petals loosening and scattering across the marble like fragments of my innocence. The truth was out, but truth was not the same as peace. My heart ached with exhaustion, with the bitter taste of betrayal, and yet, somewhere beneath the rubble of humiliation, a faint ember of strength flickered to life. I had survived her venom. I was still standing. The question that lingered now was whether Michael still stood with me. Michael's silence was unbearable, heavier than Sophia's shrill accusations had ever been. He stood there, staring at me with eyes I couldn't read, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. The priest's revelation had stripped Sophia bare, but it had also carved open a wound that refused to stop bleeding. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, desperate for him to speak, desperate to know whether love would withstand the venom that had been poured into our lives. Everyone in the church seemed frozen, holding their breath, waiting for the final judgment that only he could give. "Michael," I whispered, my voice breaking under the weight of the moment. The bouquet trembled in my hands, petals falling like fragile fragments of my hope. He finally turned to me, his eyes dark, stormy, as though wrestling with 100 conflicting emotions. "Do you believe me?" The words tasted like salt, like the ocean of tears I had held back for too long. It wasn't just a plea for him to defend me in public. It was a plea for our future, for the vows we were meant to exchange. I could not endure another wound, not now. Sophia leaned forward from her pew, her face a grotesque mask of desperation. "Michael, please," she said, her voice shrill and broken. "Don't let her fool you. She's clever. She's always been clever. But you and we could have—" She choked on her words as gasps rose again among the guests. Even in her ruin, she tried to twist the narrative, to cling to some shred of control. Her madness seeped through every syllable, and yet, I feared the damage was already done. Lies, once sown, never truly vanish. They root deep into the soil of trust. Michael finally spoke, his voice low, trembling but resolute. "Sophia," he said, each syllable heavy with disgust. "You've humiliated my fiancé, my family and yourself. You've turned this day into a circus of cruelty." His eyes cut into her, sharp as blades, but then they flickered back to me, filled with something softer, something wounded. "But Allison," he paused, and my heart froze. "The fact that you thought I might doubt you, even for a second, hurts more than anything Sophia could have done." His words struck deep, like a dagger that twisted with both love and pain. Tears blurred my vision as I tried to speak, but no words came. How could I explain that Sophia's venom had seeped so far into my soul that I doubted even the foundation we had built? How could I confess that fear, not distrust, had guided my trembling question? Michael's hands clenched at his sides as though restraining himself from reaching for me, and I felt an ache so deep it nearly broke me in half. Around us, whispers swirled, the crowd feeding on our pain like vultures circling a wounded creature. This was no longer just our private struggle. It was a spectacle. Father Gregory raised his hand once more, his tone commanding, urging Michael to act. "Love," he said solemnly, "is not measured by the absence of doubt, but by the courage to rise above it. This moment is your trial, both of you. What you choose now will shape everything that follows." His words hung in the air, reverent and piercing, and I realized this was not merely about Sophia's schemes. It was about us, about whether Michael and I had the strength to stand together despite the shadows that had been cast between us. Michael finally stepped forward, closing the space between us with a determination that made my knees weak. He took the bouquet from my trembling hands and set it gently aside, then cupped my face with both hands. His eyes burned into mine, full of anguish but also unyielding devotion. "Allison," he whispered, his voice trembling, "I don't care what lies she's tried to spread. I don't care what anyone here believes. I know who you are, and nothing, not her, not whispers, not doubt, will take that from me." His words were an anchor in the storm, pulling me back from the edge of despair. A sob escaped me as I clung to his wrists, my body shaking with relief. Around us, murmurs swelled, some approving, some scandalized, but I no longer cared. For the first time since Sophia had opened her mouth, I could breathe again. The sharp pain in my chest gave way to a fragile, trembling warmth. Sophia shrieked something incoherent, a blend of rage and heartbreak, but her words barely reached me now. I was locked in Michael's gaze, bound not by fear but by the love we had fought for. For the first time, I believed we could endure this. But just as I let myself exhale, Father Gregory's voice cut through the church again, darker now, weighted with something even more terrible. "Before vows can be spoken, one truth remains hidden," he declared, his eyes narrowing on Sophia with a gravity that silenced the room. Her confession did not end with envy or lies. It reached deeper, to a sin darker than any of you yet imagine. Gasps rippled again, and my relief froze in my chest, replaced by dread. Sophia's face twisted in panic. Michael's grip on me tightened, and I knew the worst was still to come. The priest's words struck like a thunderclap, silencing the whispers that had been bubbling in the pews. His eyes, stern and sorrowful, scanned every face before returning to Sophia. She shrank back, clutching the wooden pew as if it could shield her from the truth about to be unleashed. I felt Michael's hands tighten against my skin, his warmth steadying me, though I could sense in him the same fear twisting inside my chest. The church itself seemed to hold its breath, candles flickering, shadows dancing, as though creation itself leaned closer to hear the revelation. Sophia's lips trembled, and for the first time she looked small, broken, not triumphant, not cruel, but terrified. "Don't," she whispered to Father Gregory, her voice no louder than a hiss. Her eyes darted around the church, as if seeking some escape, but the aisle stretched long and merciless, trapping her in the gaze of 100 accusing eyes. Guests leaned forward, compelled by curiosity, by hunger for spectacle, by the thrill of watching someone burn. I could barely stand it. My sister, my blood, was about to be devoured alive by the truth she had birthed. Father Gregory's tone sharpened, cutting through the thick air like a blade. "You confessed," he said gravely, "that your jealousy was not new, that you envied Allison from the moment you were children, that you longed for what she had. Not only her place at the family table, not only her future, but her love, her bond, her very life." His voice did not waver, though Sophia's sob cracked through the silence like glass. "But you also confessed to something far darker, an act of betrayal that can no longer remain hidden." Murmurs swelled like waves crashing against stone. I clutched Michael's arms, my breath caught in my throat. I had imagined lies, cruelty, even scandal, but something deeper, something beyond words. My mind clawed at possibilities, and yet none could prepare me for what would come. Sophia's hands flew to her face, hiding her expression, as though she could bury her own shame in darkness. But shame, I knew, had claws. It tore its way into the open when least expected, dragging truth behind it. I could feel the church ready to erupt, every soul trembling on the edge of revelation. Finally, the priest's voice broke the tension with brutal clarity. "You confessed that the night Allison and Michael announced their engagement, you sought to sabotage their happiness, not merely with words, but with poison. You mixed something into Allison's drink, hoping to make her ill, hoping she would lose Michael's trust before their union even began." The words crashed over me, leaving me reeling. Gasps filled the air, followed by horrified murmurs, then silence so deep it pressed against my ears. My knees weakened as the floor seemed to vanish beneath me. The church erupted in chaos. My mother cried out, collapsing against my father's chest, while Michael stiffened as though struck by lightning. Sophia screamed, "He's lying," though her voice cracked with guilt, not conviction. Her denial twisted into sobs, her body trembling violently as if the weight of her own sin crushed her chest. I staggered back, my head spinning, memories of that night flashing through me, the bitter taste I had dismissed, the sudden wave of nausea I had blamed on nerves. My heart convulsed with horror. She had tried to destroy me before my vows were even written. Michael turned toward her, his eyes blazing with fury I had never seen in him before. "You could have killed her," he shouted, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceilings like a divine judgment. Sophia collapsed fully now, her body folding onto the floor of the aisle, her sobs filling the church like a lament. Guests recoiled, some crossing themselves, others shaking their heads in disgust. No one reached to comfort her. No one extended a hand. For the first time, she was utterly alone, stripped of every mask she had ever worn. I could not move. Betrayal cut through my veins like ice, burning and freezing all at once. This was my sister, the girl I had shared secrets with under blankets, the child who once held my hand in the dark, and yet she had poured poison into my cup. I wanted to scream, to ask why, to tear the truth out of her throat, but all that came were tears, unstoppable rivers staining my cheeks. Michael pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly, as though afraid I might crumble into dust. His touch grounded me, but inside I was still shattering. Father Gregory closed his eyes and murmured a prayer, though his voice carried an unyielding finality. "The truth is revealed," he said, "and truth demands consequence." His words landed heavy, a sentence cast not by law, but by conscience, sharper than any human punishment. Sophia sobbed into her hands, her cries echoing through the hollow church like those of a lost child. Around us, the guests shifted uncomfortably, torn between pity and revulsion. But as I looked at her, broken and exposed, I knew this was not the end. The poison had been revealed, but the scars it left would haunt us forever. The church was quiet now, the echoes of Sophia's cries fading like distant thunder. Candles flickered weakly, casting trembling shadows across the polished floor. I felt Michael's arms around me, grounding me, holding me together when I was sure I would crumble into shards of fear and relief. The guests were frozen, some whispering prayers, others shaking their heads in disbelief. My wedding dress, once a symbol of hope, now carried the weight of horror, betrayal, and revelation. Yet, in Michael's unwavering gaze, I found a small sanctuary, a place where trust could still survive. Sophia remained on the floor, her sobs ragged and raw, her body trembling with the full weight of exposure. I could see that she had been stripped of every facade she had ever worn, every manipulative smile, every cruel whisper, every poisoned act laid bare before God and man. She was small now, defeated by the very lies she had tried to weave into my life. My chest ached with conflicting emotions, triumph, sorrow, and the unbearable reality that family could hurt as deeply as enemies. The sister I had loved, the one I had trusted, had become a ghost of what she once was. Michael held me closer, pressing his lips to my temple, whispering words I could barely hear over the pounding of my own heart. "Allison," he murmured, "I believe you. I always did. Nothing she does will change that." His hands shook against mine, his grip a promise stronger than any ring. I closed my eyes, letting the tremors inside me settle just enough to breathe. For the first time since Sophia's attack, I felt the fragile lift of hope. We were still standing. We were still together. Love had survived the storm she had conjured. Our parents approached slowly, faces etched with shock and remorse. My mother's tears fell freely, her hands shaking as she reached for me. "I'm so sorry, my darling," she whispered. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you." My father's jaw was tight, but his voice carried the weight of regret. "We were blind to her malice, but we see you now, Allison. We see your courage." Their words, though belated, warmed a part of me that fear had frozen. Forgiveness would take time, but acknowledgement felt like the first step toward healing. Sophia, still trembling, lifted her head. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with mascara and shame. I wanted everything you had," she whispered, broken. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I stared at her, the girl I had known, the sister I had loved, and for a moment, I wanted to reach out. But the memory of poison, of lies, of public humiliation, made my hands shake. Some bridges, I realized, could never be rebuilt. Some betrayals left scars too deep to heal completely. And yet, I could pity her without loving her any longer. Michael took my hand and led me to the altar. The priest watched us with quiet approval, his eyes softening as he extended his blessing. "Now," he said, "let the vows you share be a testament not only to love, but to endurance, to truth, and to courage." My knees shook, but I met Michael's gaze, and in that moment, I understood that nothing Sophia could do would ever break the bond we had forged. The horror of the day remained, but it no longer defined us. We were free to create a new chapter, one written by our hands and our hearts. I recited my vows with trembling lips, each word soaked in gratitude, love, and defiance. Michael's vows mirrored my own, carrying both tenderness and strength. The church held its breath as we spoke, the congregation witnessing not a wedding overshadowed by betrayal, but a love resilient enough to survive it. Each syllable was a reclamation of my dignity, a statement that venom could not define me, and that trust, when given to the right person, could endure anything. My soul felt lighter, though the memory of Sophia's cruelty would linger for years. After the ceremony, guests offered congratulations, their faces still pale from shock. Some avoided Sophia entirely, while others shook their heads, whispering of the drama that had unfolded. I walked among them with Michael at my side, his hand warm, protective, unyielding. Each step reminded me that we had survived, that we had chosen love over fear, courage over doubt. The day had begun as a nightmare, but now it ended with hope. The storm had passed, leaving only the quiet certainty that some bonds were stronger than betrayal. That night, as we left the church, the sky was clear, stars scattered like diamonds above us. I rested my head against Michael's shoulder, letting his steady rhythm calm the lingering tremors in my body. The wounds Sophia inflicted would not vanish overnight, and trust within our family would need time to mend. But we had emerged from the chaos intact, stronger, united, and unbroken. I realized then that true love is not measured by perfection, but by the courage to face the storm and to survive it together. And as we stepped into the night, hand in hand, I knew that nothing, not even my sister's schemes, could ever take that away.